Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm really excited about today's guest. He's multifaceted and multi-talented. His name is Dick Wybrow. He's a full-time author. He's going to talk about all his books, but he's got extensive experience in television and radio and media, which I love talking to entrepreneurs in this space these days with social media. And I'm happy to welcome him to the show. So Dick, welcome.
Dr. Lou, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be called multifaceted because that could be called talented or somebody who is unable to pick a single career. Because I've done a lot of different stuff along the way, but no, I'm really excited to be here. Out
Yeah,
from sunny, beautiful Auckland, New Zealand.
yeah. Yeah, I'm called multifaceted myself because I am involved in different things, and it's hard for me to just focus on one thing because my
Yeah.
biggest fear is what if that goes away? So I'm always having my hand in different things. So, but
Mine's less about a word about if it goes away and just more about, what's that new shiny object I'm going to chase after. Writing has always been center line for me. I've always done that.
yeah.
But, from, like I said, from stand up to radio to TV and all the various script writing in between, it's always been like, I'm like a cat
Yeah.
or like a little dog running through a field, seeing a bug fly away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is you've got a lot of different superpowers. You call narcolepsy your superpower, so we'll talk about that. But kind of set the stage of how you went from media, television, radio into being a full-time author now.
Well, I was born in Canada. My father was half Kiwi. He came in the late '60s, United States, and they were like, "Oh, you can't come in here. We're a world filled up on Kiwis. Go to Canada. They'll take anybody." So he went to Canada, met my mother, but he always wanted to be in the United States, and so I spent the first 9, 10 years of my life in Canada. And then, like I said, when I was like 9 or 10 years old, my father moved us down to the United States. And I was a chubby redhead kid going into the New Jersey school system. And I was shy with a Canadian accent. And that was baptism by fire, man. That was so I didn't have a whole lot of friends, and I was that sad little kid sitting at the lunch table by himself, and these kids would come over every now and then, and they would take like my pudding, and and for a chubby little 9-year-old, the pudding was everything, man. That was my best friend at that time, and so they would come over, and they would always start the same way. They'd always start off by saying, "Hey, what you got for lunch today?" And then they'd come in, and I wouldn't say anything. I would clam up, and they would go and snatch the best thing, which was always my pudding, and they would go off. And one day, I just kind of snapped. I don't know what it was. I just snapped, and they came over, and I went, well, they go to me. They say, "So what you get for lunch today?" As they always did, and I go, "Well, I've got booger sandwiches, and I got eyeball pate," and they just started laughing. They just started laughing. And then one dude kind of puts his hand on my shoulder and walks off. And most importantly, they left my pudding alone. So in that moment, I learned so many things. One was about the power shift of humor. If you've got somebody laughing, suddenly now you've got a bit of a seat at the table. You're in control, right? And the most important thing I learned for a chubby little 9-year-old was if I was funny, I could keep my pudding. So I had to, at that point, every day kind of come up with some sort of gross out humor. And I did. I would write lines in like the first couple of my classes and come up with stupid stuff, but I could keep my pudding. Eventually, those kids kind of became friends. They were a couple years older and they looked out for me. But that I learned all of that through just the power of humor, and that just grew from there. My love of stand-up comedy, and then my love of writing, and that turned into when I turned 19, I tested some of that stuff out, and I got into stand-up comedy. And I did that for a couple of years. Then basically at that point, because there was a time there in the early '90s when you do a stand-up show, and it was just this wall of people in there. It was so great, just packed in there, right? And you felt like Russell Crowe and Gladiator. Are you entertained? It was amazing. But then stand-up started showing up on television all over the place. It was on, it was on A&E, it was on USA, it was on all these channels. Fewer and fewer people started coming out, so I got into radio. I did that for about a dozen years. Something similar happened. Radio was starting to get watered down because they changed the laws. And then, suddenly get people from Dallas. They're now doing afternoon shows in Minneapolis. Somebody in St. Louis is doing 6 shows around the country. and it really watered the product down. And there were a lot of sort of governors on everything you could say because people got really nervous after that Janet Jackson Super Bowl. So I hopped into TV and I did television for about 20 years and until I could really get the wheels moving on the writing stuff. Now I'm a full-time author with a best-selling series, which is my dream. I'm living the dream right now. It's fantastic.
Yeah, what you're describing is the story of a creative entrepreneur, and I love this. Either is speaking, it could be musician, it could be comedy, anything. These are all creative fields. So one thing that I'm always curious about is because creativity, people say that you're either creative or not, but that's not true. So tell people why that, and what is your creative process?
I think creativity, I agree with you 100%. I think creativity, there's a bit of courage, or in my case, putting defense mode. But yeah, you've got to feel comfortable enough to be creative because that's scary. Because, if you were to create something and somebody doesn't like it, that's somebody not liking something at your core. And that can really sort of take a shot at you. And so it just takes putting it out there. And then eventually, like I said, I was in radio for 12 years and I had people that loved my show and then people that hated me. I had death threats against me. And if there's nothing that's going to give you Teflon skin, real thick skin when it comes to criticism, it's a handful of death threats. That'll do it for you, especially if you don't die. That's the best part. But for me, in creating, it's getting through that fear, that anxiety of like, what if I put this out and somebody doesn't like it? And I started to think about, do I like this? Is this something I want to read? Is this something I would like to hear about? And if it was, then I kind of got in the mindset of like, well, then I'm doing it for me. I'm creating this just for me. And that kind of helps a bit. So if nobody loves it, yeah, that noise does ring out there, but it's something that I want to do. And so when I sit down to create something, I come in with that. It's like, well, how would I want to see this world kind of kick in? And that actually drove a lot of the series I'm with Kane, because when I first started writing it, and I won't go into all of it at this moment, when I first started writing, it was this sort of reverse werewolf book. And I was like, yeah, but I want to have more fun with it. And I tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it to turn into something that I really loved. And then I started writing it and I got lucky. A lot of other people seem to love it too.
The other question is because what you remind me of is kind of when I was listening to Steven Spielberg when he was first getting into film. It was just like he's just about the character and he wanted the movies, and it was all about the process. That's where he found his flow. Um so, and then what I've also realized is I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs these days, and a lot of them have some kind of a superpower. For one person, it's ADHD, another could be bipolar, another could be just, neurodiversity. So, talk about you have narcolepsy, and that's your
Right.
superpower for writing.
Yeah, and I discovered a lot of people don't exactly know what narcolepsy is. I kind of know what it is. Basically, narcolepsy, and there's a lot of different shades of it, but it just means you're sleepy all the time. 100% of the time, you're just sleepy. There's medicines for it, but none of it's terribly good. You can take some of these sort of methamphetamine salts, but that's like Adderall and Ritalin, stuff like that. That kind of makes you a little bit like a little jittery, and that's no good. So why when I first discovered that I had it, I was in my late 20s or so, and I discovered it purely on accident. I wasn't even seeking it out. The person I was married to at the time was a bit of a hypochondriac. I'm not being mean. It's just something that she had within her. And she went in because she was convinced she had narcolepsy. And so she was talking with the doctor, and I'm like leaning in the door, and, and anytime I needed to chip in, she'd turn to me to help me answer a question, whatever. And the doctor at the end of this turns to her and says, "I don't think you have narcolepsy, but I think he might." And I went, "What?" And sure enough, they tested me. It turned out I had narcolepsy. And so the one good thing at that point was sort of having a name for that demon. That was helpful in a lot of ways. This was a thing that bothered me. I didn't know that I was so much different. This is why you feel the way you do. It's not that you're lazy or depressed all the time. It's you have narcolepsy. And so the first little while when I had it, I was like, why do I have to have this? It's just, I feel like this all the time. But then I started to realize, and you think back to those pudding days, and then all those days after that, the stand-up comedy, and I was in radio when I got diagnosed. I started to take a look at, I started to realize a lot of my creativity, I believe, came from narcolepsy. It's a little bit like when you're lying down going to sleep, right? And as you're about to fall asleep, you get into that creative zone and you come up with those amazing ideas and you say to yourself, wow, that is really good. I should write that down. And you wake up the next morning and you can't remember it and you didn't write it down. Well, that zone that you lie down, that little dream sort of state you're in, I'm in that state 85% of my day. I'm in that sort of zony, dreamy state. And I get these ideas that flow in and flow in. And so all it is at that point is I've taken what in the beginning I saw as a disorder and a crutch. I've turned around and I see it as something that, as you say, is a superpower for me. And I've put reins on it and I'm riding it. And I let it go. I just, when I get those real sleepy moments, I sit back and think, here come the ideas. Here come the strange moments. And it's really worked for me. And so it's just sort of trusting in that and keeping positive as I can about it. Positivity is a superpower in itself. And people like this. You see people around you like, man, that person is really positive all the time. And I don't know, when you sort of put that positivity out, it does reflect back to you. So like I say, I've embraced it as a superpower. I'm really positive about it, and the rewards are coming in.
Yeah, really fascinating because I can tell, I can talk to you, and I can feel your flow. And so the other question is, what's the best moment you experience when writing a book, and what is your number one goal when you're crafting a story? Is it to just to get into these flow states and kind of just create and write, or is it, to entertain? Kind of describe that for the audience.
The best moments for me are when I'm sitting down and I'm just sort of in that zone. And it often sitting down to write it's a job. It's hard to do. But and there's many times when I sit down to do it, I'm like, oh no, actually I've got to clean the floor. Oh no, I've got to fold clothes. Oh, my lawn looks amazing right now because I'm right in the middle of finishing a book. But when I finally do force myself and sit down and do it, after a couple hours, I really do get into a zone. And it's no longer me sort of forcing those words onto the page. It's almost like this reverse flow in a way, right? They start to kind of come into me, even to such a point where I'll laugh because this sort of line will come into my head. It's funny because I have readers all the time say, "This is so funny. How did you come up with this?" Like, I don't know. That line dropped into my head. And not to name drop, but one of the people that best described this to me, when I was in radio, I got to interview all these old rock stars, and one of those Tom Petty. And people would always ask him about creativity. And as he described it, he said, creativity is like these little gifts that come down. I can sit and try and write something, but really they just sort of come down on their own schedule when they want to come on down. And you just got to be able to recognize those and embrace those. And so that's what it is for me, getting down into that zone, creating an environment to where I am open to those gifts coming down. And they do. And that's how the best stuff comes out onto the page. And so that's part of my creative process. It's working into that creativity, which almost seems counterintuitive. Just that job, sitting down at the desk, making myself do the thing I want to do. It's still hard to do. Making myself do what I want to do, and then opening myself up to that flow.
Yeah. And then the next question is, when you're creating this, so, a lot of people, they either create for themselves, to help them, or others create for others. And so when you do this creative process and at the end of the process, let's say, how do you deal with
Right.
criticism? Like somebody doesn't like it, or, somebody loves it. How do you deal with that?
Like I said, I have an advantage because I had death threats. So I'm not bothered by criticism. And to be honest, I see criticism as just more noise. But not even negative. Somebody was so engaged in what you wrote, what I put on the page. Somebody was so engaged, they sat down, took the time, pulled their phone out, opened the app, and typed something in. So that's somebody who's actually engaged in the writing. So I take that as a positive, regardless of what they might say. And there's plenty of times somebody might say something in a review of stuff they didn't like. And I've heard this many times. Somebody comes on and goes, "Oh, actually, I like that thing he didn't like," and then they might end up buying the book, which is totally great, which is totally fine with me. But my goal when I sit down and write is selfishly just to entertain myself. I just try and enjoy, the process, and I try and enjoy the characters, the interaction. And if I'm kind of laughing and enjoying the ride, it turns out in the end, other people do too. And, you know, and it's also being sort of open when that starts to develop. And I have to remind myself of this. Like when I first sat down to write Cain, and I can't believe this, it was literally just over a year ago, not this past December, the December past. But when I sat down in my little quarter of a garage in New Zealand, it was just me. I was the only fan of Cain there was. But then when that grows, you start to have to be able to share your heart with these other people, you know, because now they're invested. Now they have an emotional investment. And now I have an obligation to them to make sure that it's all going to be right. In fact, I had this amazing experience when I was just starting to write book 3. And I was sort of struggling with it. And I had some ideas, but I wasn't exactly sure where I was going to go. And every now and then, I get readers that reach out to me, these reader groups. And I've spoken to people in Canada, the US, in Australia, and this one was in the UK. And so there's a Zoom call like you and I are talking right now. And I sat down and I was talking to this group in the UK, and this lovely woman in the UK who'd read the first 2 books. And all she said to me, and keep in mind that morning I've been struggling about, it's missing something. I can't get something. And she goes like, I can't wait to hear more about Cain's childhood. Because what happens in the story, real briefly, is Cain was a wolf who gets bitten by this infected man and turns into a 6'7" French Canadian. And the book is about him trying to discover the secret to turn back into a wolf again. But for a year, he spent on this farm in British Columbia with this lovely couple who took him in. And basically, it was a wolf raised by humans instead of a human raised by wolves. But they taught him about how to be human. And I allude to this through the first 2 books. And so she said, I can't wait to find out more about what that year for him was like as he grew from a teenage boy into this full grown man, what that experience was, what these human parents said to him. And I sat back and I came up to the mic, went, that's funny, because that's exactly what I'm doing in book 3. You know, it's so funny you mentioned that particular thing, but she was exactly right. That's exactly when that needed to happen. And so it was almost this crazy sort of, I don't know, call it like a collective heart or collective brain. You know, she gave me, that's some desire that she had. And she was exactly right. That's where the story needed to go, and heavily influenced book 3. And she's a good friend of mine now, especially because she's been such a part of that. So I guess, like I say, part of the creative process comes from within, but it's also about opening yourself out to some of the environment around you, avoiding the negativity. But when you get that positivity, take that in, you might be able to use it.
Yeah, I find the reviews are usually somebody takes the time to put a review, either positive or negative. It's either they really loved it or they, didn't like it because they're gonna, but always take it as feedback. And like I said, I kind of do this I'm curious about other people and I want to talk to different people and learn things and get new insights and, share that. So, but so
you can use that negativity in a positive way too, by the way. And this is something I've talked about to a number of authors, or even not even just authors. If you're in any creative field, like I was in television for 20 years, and I had a lot of haters. It's just the nature of the industry. I had a lot of people, especially the higher you rise up and higher you rise up, because I became an executive producer. I had a lot of people that really would try and take shots at you. Even those frenemies, those people that smile at you, but they're sort of jabbing a knife in your side. And I tell you what, when I would be lying in bed, because I worked 10-hour days right before I became a full-time author late last year, I'd be lying in bed and I would think about those haters I had at the office. And I would be like, oh, I've got to start work. My work day started at 7:30 in television, but I would get up at 3:30, 4 o'clock to write. And on those days I was lying there going, oh, I'm too tired. I don't want to do this. I would think about how happy that would make those haters in my life, how just the joy that would give them if they heard me go, no, I don't want to do my dream right now. And I would use that to get my butt out of bed. And I was like, I'm not going to make them happy. I'm going to use their negativity as fuel to get my butt out of bed and in that chair. So you might have detractors, but use their negativity against them and let that power you. It works. It absolutely works. It got me out of bed dozens and dozens of times.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of briefly tell the audience about what the book is about, how they can find it, and how they can find you and your work.
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, Cain it's a fun story. It's called humorous fantasy, but I myself, I'm not a huge monster book reader. I've never really read a lot of monster books. I read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein back in high school, I think. So it's not really a monster book. Basically, like I said, it's about this wolf who gets bitten by this. It turns out to be a super soldier, in fact, a super soldier. But the bite turns him into a human the next day. He turns into the 6'7" French Canadian, and now he's out there searching for the answers, the clues that he needs to turn back into a wolf because he wants to be a wolf. He's seen humans. He's like, yeah, I don't want to do this. I prefer to be a wolf. Running around naked through the forest is how I want to go. He could do that as a human, but he'd probably get incarcerated or frostbite in some very unfortunate places up in Canada. So that's what this story is. And he's joined by this young woman named Imelda. And she's a former criminal, maybe not so former criminal, but she gets involved in his quest. And so the story is, and it sounds like, this is it's a funny book. People tell me it's a funny book, but I don't really classify it as like a fantasy or monster book because basically it's about two people that don't quite fit into the world. But when they come together and they become really good friends through the story, when they come together, these two people that don't quite fit in the world find now that they do. And we all know people like that. We all know those friends that sort of that other piece that we're missing that fit in there that help us slide through life a little bit better. And really, it's a story about people who become friends, and it's fun. I've had a blast doing it. I'm just finished, like I said, I'm just finishing up book 4 right now. You can go to Amazon and search my name, Dick Wybrow, search Kane, it's there, or go to my website. And it's really exciting because Podium, this is cool. Doctor, within a couple of weeks, and this, I never expected this thing to go to bestseller, hit a bestseller list. But within a couple of weeks of being published, I had Podium Audio approach me and they said, we want to do your audiobooks. And they did. And so the first one came out here in January. The second one comes out later in February. The next one comes out shortly after that. So if you're an audiobook reader, go check it out. It's a lot of fun. And the narrators or performers that do the book are so fantastic. And I was so impressed by the talent they brought into it. And that's another neat thing. I sort of put the talent that I've got into this book and they lift it up to another level, the talent they bring into it. So it's really exciting.
What a fantastic conversation. And for all the audience out there, be sure to check out Dick's works. All of these links will be in the show notes, and be sure to give him a like and follow, as well as his book. It's on Amazon. Go check it out, leave a 5-star review. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast and talking about the creative process.
Thank you, Dr. Will. I really enjoyed it.